Ani Bojo. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our second part of a four-part webinar series titled Decolonizing HIV Prevention Through Two-Eyed Seeing. I'm going to ask our elder Linda Barkman to start us off in a good way. Good morning, Linda.
Morning, everybody. It's awesome to see everybody up and beautiful morning here. The sun's shining, and wherever you are, the sun's shining, and it's all coming from the same place, Miigwet's Creator, that we all feel the sun and the warmth and the wind and everything at this exact time, even though we're sitting inside, right? But we all still feel the air, and we were all connected that way. And that's the beautiful thing that the Creator has for us, that we can all be connected one way or another. And that just gets me all excited to be part of these webinars and everything, just sharing what we all know. And some of us know more than others. And that's the beautiful thing about this, is that we get to know what everybody knows. So I did this much earlier, but I usually always like to get everybody involved. So if you have water, whether it be in a cup or even in a water container, that's all fine. Or even if you bought it from the store or get it from this tap, water is sacred, no matter how you get it. I just get very emotional about stuff, just knowing that a lot of people around Turtle Island don't have what we have, that we have so abundant of is water. So I usually like to invite everybody to get some water in a cup or whatever, and do the smudging that way. So I have a cup of water. So usually I like to either you dip your fingers in there, or you can pour a little bit into your hand. But I do. I'll ask you to dip it and smudge your hand. And then when you do that, you're gonna smudge your head. You're gonna smudge your eyes and ask Creator to see the beauty in the life. Not even the beauty, but also the not so beautiful. For that, we will ask the Creator to please turn it beautiful, that He can help us to do that. Then we smudge our ears. We ask Creator to help us hear what is being said, and for us to listen to what is being said. Then we smudge our mouths, so that way people can understand what we say and how we want to say it. Then you'll dip again, and then you'll smudge your shoulders and your heart, and you'll ask Creator, take everything off that doesn't belong to me. Because what hurts somebody else, we don't want to spread that along. So we ask Creator to take that off of us. And then we dip our fingers again, smudge, and we smudge our legs and the back of your legs and your feet, and ask Creator, help me not to walk in front of people. Help me not to walk behind people, but to walk alongside, because that's where we truly do our helping the most, because we can't see behind. And you're going to smudge again. You're going to smudge your whole aura all around you. Ask the Creator, take off all our negativity. Take it off, because like I said, it doesn't belong to you. And brush in all the positive that you feel around you and all the love. Then you're going to hold up and you're going to ask Creator, cleanse me from what I don't need. Cleanse me for what I do need. Then you're going to take a sip, and as you're drinking that, you're thinking, Creator Miigwech, for the life that you give me, for the loves that I have, for the loves I'm going to have. Miigwech, Creator, for letting me walk alongside people. Walk alongside, because we are involved in their journey. And for that, I miigwech. 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 And I'm so excited.
Me, Linda. Me too.
I
Exciting.
love you.
Ani Bojo, Aaron Bowerman Indigenous, Shigwenda First Nation, Minwa Trona Donjaba. I am an Anishinaabe two-spirit male. I use he, him pronouns. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second part of a four-part webinar series. And this one is titled Decolonizing HIV Prevention Through Two-Eyed Seeing. Our hosts today are Oahas, Two-Spirited People of the First Nations, and CATIE. And I will be your moderator for the next hour and a half. And before we go through a bit of today's agenda, I'm going to introduce Megan Young, who's the Executive Director of the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS Strategy. Welcome, Megan.
Wedge Aaron, Bojo Genawea, Nigansit, Nindishnakas, Misquatasina Dodem, Gitchwikadong and Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwe, meanwhile, Osagadowi Kwe, meanwhile, Shaganashi Kwe and Dal. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really grateful to be here with you all. My English name is Megan. I'm the Executive Director of the Ontario Aboriginal HIV/AIDS Strategy. I'm from the Painted Turtle Clan. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm really excited to be here with you this afternoon, as Aaron mentioned, as the second part of our four-part webinar series. This webinar series really came about as part of conversations between two-spirited peoples of the First Nation, CATIE and Oahas, as we were talking about what we had been hearing from some of the frontline workers who are working with people in areas of HIV prevention, as well as helping people navigate services, healthcare services. And what we had heard from the workers here at Oahas when they were completing some of their HIV training was they wanted some more practical information on how to connect people that they were walking alongside, such as how do they navigate services, how do they connect people with PrEP, where can they find information that was relevant and resonated with community around PrEP and PEP and why it might be relevant for some of the people accessing our services. And so as a result of those conversations, we decided that we would have a four-part webinar series this year that would help us engage in some dialogue and increase information and awareness in community for how people can get access to this information, as well as what services are available. So the first webinar we had back in June, which if you did miss that, you can always catch it on the CATIE website. They have their past webinars posted there. So in our first webinar, we really wanted to take a step back to look at how we were framing conversations around sexual health in Indigenous community. And so we had a number of amazing speakers who talked about sexual health as being medicine, good medicine for us, and how we can have conversations around that and how it relates to HIV and HIV prevention. Today, as Aaron mentioned, we will be getting more into some of the biomedical information. And that was some of the feedback we had from participants in the first webinar, was that they wanted to hear more around what is PrEP, what is PEP, what does that mean, who is it relevant for, and how do people access as well as U equals U, what does that mean? And so today we will be talking about some more of the specifics. And you're in for a real treat. We have a number of amazing and highly knowledgeable panelists here to share their information with you and help contextualize this from a two-eyed seeing perspective. So the biomedical pieces, as well as from cultural understanding and Indigenous worldviews. What does this mean for us in community? Our third webinar we're going to be having as part of Indigenous AIDS Awareness Week in December, so please stay tuned for that. And that webinar will be getting more into pathways for access. So we're excited. We're in the planning process for that and putting that together for you. And our fourth webinar will be in the new year sometime, probably February or March. And that will be around having conversations in community. So how do we tailor messaging both to community in in-person ways as well as developing virtual community or online community, and how do we make messaging relevant as it relates to HIV prevention. So with that, Chumigwet, and I'll turn it back over to you, Aaron.
Gwetch, Megan. So before we begin, I just thought I'd give you a quick overview of what today is going to look like. So we heard from Linda and Megan. We had a recap of webinar 1, what we're going to currently talk about, and what the future webinars will look like. I'm going to go over just a bit of housekeeping. We're going to hear from Sharia Hari, who is joining us from CATIE. We're going to talk about some very highly effective HIV prevention strategies. And then we're going to hear from 2 of our amazing panelists, Dr. Albert McLeod and Martin Moberg, who have been doing a lot of work in the movement for many years and are really working on some really innovative community-focused work. So we're really excited about that. We're going to have a brief Q&A. We will remind folks of future webinars, and then we're going to ask Linda to close us off in a good way again. So a little bit of housekeeping. We really encourage you to do what you need to feel grounded and to be present in our conversations today. So if that means, having water with you, having your medicines around, laughing, maybe you have a cat or a dog you need around, please do what you need to do to really fully immerse yourself in this conversation and gain what you need to do this good work in your community. With that, I do want to mention that this is a respectful space, so we are going to have zero tolerance of homophobia, discrimination, stigma, sexism, racism. If something like this does happen, we're going to ask you to refrain from saying those comments. If it continues, we will ask you to leave, but we will encourage you to view the recording after, and then either CATIE, Two Spirits, or Oahas, we are all here to answer questions if you have any of those following that. So please just be kind to each other. Also in this, I'm sure we're all pretty familiar with what Zoom is and how it works, but we do have a chat box. So we encourage people to use this chat box to really praise your fellow colleagues. Just, really let them know how appreciative of the work that they're doing. We also have a Q&A section at the bottom. You'll see it there beside the chat function. This is specific to questions that you may have for our panelists. So please use that. And we will have a section where we're going to be using Menti, which is an online interactive sort of fun tool where we are going to be creating some word clouds. This session is also being recorded, so we'll ask you to refrain from recording, but once the session is done, this will be sent out, I believe, by end of day, if not by end of day, tomorrow for sure. And yeah, with that, we have some guiding questions for the conversation and hopefully help us focus in on some stories and knowledge we'd like for you to hear and we'd like for our panelists to share. But we'll see where the conversation takes us. We're gonna have some fun with it and really, be transformative in our thinking and the way we do our work. So before I invite Sharia from CATIE to speak to us, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce our speakers. And so today we have Dr. Albert McLeod and Martin Moberg. So if you may, I'd like to ask Albert if you'd like to introduce yourself, where you are on the land, what affiliations or any identities you might use or hold, and anything else you'd like to share with our audience today.
Thank you, Aaron. Can you hear me? Does my sound good?
Can.
Yeah. I'm in Winnipeg, which is Treaty 1 territory and the homeland of the Red River Métis people. And there's 5 treaty areas actually in Manitoba. I come from northern Manitoba, My ancestry is Scottish, men who worked in the Hudson Bay fur trade, as well as the Woodlands Cree and the Swampy Cree, who also worked in the fur trade. So I've emerged, colonial identity. I moved to Vancouver in 1979 to be part of the gay culture, particularly the Indigenous gay culture. And that was a time when HIV was just making its way into North America. And it was already in Vancouver at the time, even though the media was coming from New York or San Francisco. So unbeknownst to us, it was present, and many of my peers, colleagues, became HIV positive in that time. So in the last 40 years, I've been working around Two-Spirit advocacy, also HIV advocacy, and more recently, sharing cultural knowledge. And yeah, that's me.
Wedge, Albert. Martin, may I invite you to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me here today. My name is Martin Morberg. I'm Northern Shoshone and Tlingit. So I'm originally from the Yukon Territory. I belong to the First Nation of Notchinaikdan. My Tlingit name that I was given at birth is Yakakwan, and I am currently on the traditional territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam Nations, also known as Vancouver, BC. So currently I'm working as the Two-Spirit Program Coordinator for the Community-Based Research Center, but a lot of my background comes from like community-driven and grassroots initiatives. So my feet are firmly planted in the community, and I've had a lot of mentors and Indigenous leaders and Two-Spirit people that have modeled the way for me. So it's a big thanks to them that I'm able to do this kind of work today. And I just really want to raise my hands in a good way to Linda Masi Cho. Thank you so much for that really beautiful opening. I feel like I really needed that grounding today. So Masi Cho, thank you.
Miigwech, Albert and Martin. We're really excited to have you here today. I would like to introduce you all to Sharia Hari from CATIE, and Sharia is going to give us a brief presentation on some highly effective HIV preventative strategies.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Aaron, for that introduction. And I just want to echo Martin's words about the wonderful way in which Linda grounded us. I think it was really powerful to hear about the idea of walking alongside one another. That definitely resonates with me. And so, as Aaron mentioned, my name is Shreya. I'm an immigrant settler here on Turtle Island. And prior to living here, I lived in India, which is where I'm from. And so today I live in Treaty 13 territory. And before chatting about HIV prevention today as a health educator at CATIE, I want to take a moment to acknowledge with gratitude and respect that our work takes place on Indigenous land. Our office is situated in the same place I currently live, Treaty 13 territory. These are the traditional territories of the Wendat, Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people today. Our outreach and education work is also carried out on Indigenous territories across these lands. And as some of you know, our work at CATIE is linked to understanding the science behind HIV and hepatitis C, how these viruses work, and how we can prevent transmission. We know that because of colonialism, HIV, hepatitis C, and other health issues have disproportionately and unfairly affected Indigenous communities. So for this reason, I really hope we do our work in good ways with Indigenous communities when invited to do so. So thank you so much to Oahas and Two-Spirited people, the First Nations, for inviting us here today to share some information and participate in this conversation. So, for me, especially as an immigrant settler here, I feel the sense of responsibility when I'm doing health-related work to ensure that these advances in HIV prevention are reaching Indigenous communities. And so today I'm going to share some scientific information on things like condoms and medication to prevent HIV. And it's my sincere hope that this knowledge about highly effective HIV prevention strategies may be useful for Indigenous communities. And as we know, by no means is science going to be the bulk of today's story or conversation. There will be this wonderful panel discussion with Martin and Dr. Albert McLeod. They're really going to talk about how to weave together this small bit of scientific knowledge with the vast range of Indigenous ways of knowing and surviving and thriving, these ways that have existed since time immemorial. And so at this point, I'd like to invite all of you participating today to share your thoughts on HIV prevention through the following activities. So I'm going to just direct your attention to the chat. And the question I have for all of you is, what's one word that comes to mind when you think of HIV prevention? So you can add one word answers here up to a maximum of 3 times. And as you share your answers, we're actually going to be able to see us build a word cloud together. So your answers will come in, and we will be able to see, hopefully, a cloud be built on this page. Amazing. So people have written in, there's care, choice, empowerment. I see community. Oh, these are wonderful words. Care and hope, condoms. Yeah, and no matter what HIV prevention strategy we're talking about, there's this idea that it should be embedded in this idea of community and culture. I see cultural safety. I see U equals U, access to ARV treatment, my culture, love, empowerment. Oh, this is wonderful. Choice, community. And we can see many people writing in community. That word is standing out quite prominently. That's wonderful to see. Care and hope, care, again, love. I think, oh my, this cloud is moving, so it's a little bit difficult to even pick out certain letters, but I see safety. I think I even see, I think there's some words in even other languages. I think I just saw something. Yeah, well-being, long-term PrEP, self-empowered. We need more resources. Yes. I see Oahas in there, equity. So it's very clear that, this is a group that knows a lot already about what comes to mind when we think about HIV prevention. I think I read somewhere, yup, condoms. Yep, sure. Consent, yes. Wonderful. I see U equals U or UU. Yeah. This is great. I think this is such a powerful, powerful set of words that can really show us how we all have a wonderful role to play in HIV prevention, and that it really is about a community coming together. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen as we sort of move on to the next activity, but I think it's wonderful that people are still writing in letters or writing in words, and we can revisit this cloud towards the end of the meeting. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen as we dive into discussing a little bit more about HIV prevention. So here we go. So, I think it's very clear from, again, the wonderful words you all shared that we can all play such a powerful role in preventing HIV transmission. And as many of you already know, HIV prevention options have changed and improved a lot in the past number of years. And so we now have the power to prevent HIV both before and after exposure. And whether we live with HIV or not, we can all play a powerful role in preventing transmission. And so it's my hope today that, through several conversations, we can see how these prevention tools can empower everyone. I think knowledge sharing spaces such as this are so crucial. And, Linda also talked about just learning from one another in this space. And, that's also really important to me. And I hope that the space can achieve that. There's also such potential for stigma reduction that comes with these prevention tools. And so that's also really exciting to think about. There was in the word cloud that people wrote, there was this idea of improving access or having more resources. And so, yes, we need to improve access to these prevention tools. And ultimately, we really hope that we can move forward into a world with less stigma, fewer HIV transmissions, and really have this positive impact for individuals as well as for communities. Okay, so before we talk about these amazing tools to stop HIV transmission, we might want to just briefly recap a little bit about how transmission happens. And I know there's a really knowledgeable group of people here today, so a lot of this is just going to be a very quick review. And so, common ways in which HIV is transmitted, this really involves anal sex or vaginal or frontal sex or injection drug use. And so HIV can be passed through these ways most commonly. And then less commonly, there are a few other ways. So we know that HIV can also be transmitted to an infant through breast or chest milk. And HIV is less commonly transmitted during pregnancy, labor, and delivery in Canada because most people are on consistent HIV treatment. HIV can only be transmitted through 5 bodily fluids, so breast milk, blood, rectal fluid, vaginal fluid, semen, and precum. And, we've talked about, just a brief bit about the different ways in which HIV is transmitted. When we discuss prevention strategies today, we're going to primarily focus on how to stop the sexual transmission of HIV. But it's still important to include all of these different ways in which HIV is transmitted. And then we also want to share a little bit of information on all of the ways in which HIV cannot be transmitted. So everyday casual contact, hugging or shaking hands or touching will not transmit HIV. And HIV cannot be passed on by sharing food or drink with someone who has HIV. And it cannot be passed on through kissing. And sneezing, coughing, or spitting will not transmit HIV. HIV is not transmitted through, swimming pools or toilet seats or anything like that. And finally, HIV cannot be passed on by animals or insects. And with that, we're going to dive into highly effective HIV prevention strategies. So probably the best well-known, highly effective prevention strategy would be condoms. And so condoms are, of course, physical barriers that can reduce the risk of a sexual exposure to HIV because they're made of materials that don't allow HIV to pass through them. And so the consistent and correct use of external or internal condoms with every sex act is a highly effective strategy to help prevent the sexual transmission of HIV. They can be used with water-based or silicone-based lube, but we don't recommend oil because oil can disintegrate condoms. And then as an added bonus, condoms are also highly effective at preventing other sexually transmitted infections or STIs. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to chat about are actually medications that can be taken by HIV negative people to prevent HIV transmission. So earlier on, I had talked a little bit about how, whether we live with HIV or are HIV negative, we all have this powerful role to play in preventing transmission. And so PEP and PrEP are these HIV medications used by HIV negative people to prevent HIV transmission. And so PEP stands for post-exposure prophylaxis, and PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis. And so what's the difference between PEP and PrEP? So we're going to start with PEP. And PEP is really intended to be used to prevent HIV transmission from a single exposure. So let's say I'm someone who enjoys having lots of sex with all of my different partners, and I tend to use condoms, but one time the condom breaks. And so what I would then do is probably go to the nearest emergency department, and I would take PEP, just 1 pill a day, as soon as possible after this potential exposure. And it's important that I, after this exposure, that I take PEP within 3 days, and ideally as soon as possible. And it's 1 pill a day, and I would take it, once I start taking it, I would take it for 28 days. And as you can imagine, it might be a bit of a process to get to an ER and get to, a doctor and, have that conversation and get that prescription. So for some people who may be at higher risk, communities and agencies have started distributing PEP in advance so that people are prepared for an emergency. And this is a strategy that includes PEP. It's called PEP in Pocket, or PIP. And it really means that someone can be prepared in advance for an emergency because they already have PEP with them. Okay, so then what about PrEP? So PrEP is really intended for regular use as an ongoing HIV prevention measure. And the way that PrEP works is something like this. So say I'm someone who likes having sex with lots of different partners, and I don't want to use condoms. Instead, I want to prevent HIV transmission and protect myself in a different way. And so the way that I might go about doing that is I would talk to a doctor, and I would get a prescription for PrEP, and then I would take PrEP for a certain period of time. And this is, and during this time, I would not be having sex with my partners. Instead, during this time, it's to allow my body to build up enough PrEP in the tissues to prevent transmission, so that after that time period is over, there is enough PrEP in my tissues to act as a shield against HIV. And so I would be protected in this way. And then after that time period, I would still continue to take 1 pill a day, every day, on an ongoing basis, and I would be having sex with my partners. And so this is a way in which these are medications that can be used by HIV negative people to prevent transmission. So that's quite exciting. And then I also wanted to share a little bit of information which involves this powerful role for people living with HIV in preventing transmission. And this really has to do with the relationship between HIV treatment and undetectable viral load. So people living with HIV have been at the forefront of addressing this epidemic in our communities ever since it began. And so thanks to their strong advocacy and efforts, we have better treatments today than ever before. And the primary benefit of HIV treatment is that effective treatment improves the quality of life for people living with HIV. But there is also an added benefit of this highly effective treatment. And that's this: if a person living with HIV takes HIV treatment as prescribed, the amount of HIV in their blood, which is also known as viral load, can become so low that tests cannot detect it. And this is called having an undetectable viral load. And when someone is on HIV treatment and they maintain an undetectable viral load, they will not transmit HIV through sex. And this is information that I think many people in the group already know. We saw that in the word cloud. We saw undetectable equals untransmittable, or U equals U. You might have heard it phrased that way. You might have also heard can't pass it on. And you might have also heard this as part of a broader strategy that really looks at treatment as prevention. And again, people living with HIV are really leaders in this movement. Their passion and advocacy have made these biomedical and social advancements possible. And there is such potential here for stigma reduction as well. And people living with HIV are really powerhouses of the movement, from programs to policies to the development of medications to addressing sexual health or the needs of people who are experiencing houselessness, to the needs of people who are using drugs, to even gender advocacy for women and trans and non-binary people, as well as advocacy around sexual orientation. It's so clear that people living with HIV routinely and continually play such powerful, significant roles. People living with HIV are crucial in ensuring that all the work we do, including prevention, happens in good ways. And so what I'd like to ask you all now is, what's a prevention strategy that you would like to see more of in your community? And I'm just going to direct your attention to the link in the chat. Just give me 1 second, and if you can refresh that link, you will see a new question now in the chat. So just give me 1 second, and there we go. So if you can visit the link, I can share the link again if that is helpful. Yeah, this is great. So I'm seeing PrEP, education. Yeah, and none of these tools stand on their own, right? They have to be interwoven into this idea of culture as prevention. PrEP, for sure, comprehensive sex ed in school systems, less barriers to treatment, harm reduction, community education, deal with stigma. Yes, this is wonderful. I see PrEP. Let's see if there are others here. Yeah, I can scroll. So we have, talking more about U equals U, adequate housing, shame and stigma breaking. Yeah, more testing and prevention bundles in places where there isn't access to HIV testing and prevention. Yeah, ERs, homeless shelters, etc. Youth focused. Do this work from a place of love. Yeah, I think that's absolutely so crucial. More openness about sex and talking about sex and sexuality, basic income. Structural interventions like truth and reconciliation, absolutely. Sustainable HIV funding for BIPOC communities, greater Indigenous and Two-Spirit visibility. Yeah, this is absolutely wonderful. Holistic wellness supports, primary health care who will prescribe access to PrEP and PEP and are able to provide HIV treatment, break down purity culture. Yes, paired STD/VI prevention, testing and linkage. Access to withdrawal and long-term treatment centers for free. Gender education, trauma-informed practices, HIV peers as leaders, less cis white folks at tables. Yeah. Better mental health and addiction supports, decolonize sexuality. I think these are such wonderful strategies. I think so many wonderful things have been shared here. I'd be happy to, take these answers and repackage them if that is useful at the end. And I think this is just really wonderful. I'd also just like to, share that there are some resources in the chat that might be helpful for everyone. Just going to stop sharing my screen here. And, I just wanted to say thank you again for this invitation for us to share a bit of what we know, but I think it's so clear that what the participants in this group know is so much more already. And so thank you again, and over to you, Erin.
Lots of information. I can't agree with you more on, the strength and leadership of people living with HIV and how much of an influence that's had on my life and my passion and the love I feel and get from people that I work with. I couldn't agree with you more on that aspect. Even so much so that, COVID-19 vaccine, like that came from people that are working in this movement. And I think we don't realize how much work has been done throughout the years and how much it is influencing our lives currently and moving forward, even in terms of harm reduction and sexual health and gender issues. And so I completely agree with you there. I know we did have a question about non-insured health benefits and if it covers PrEP and PEP, and it does. In Ontario, it does cover those medications, so that's definitely something to note. PIP is a new sort of strategy that's being done, and I think one that could work very well for Indigenous people. And it's, because we all, when you live on a reserve and you have to go into a health center and talk to somebody who could be your auntie or your best friend's mom, it can be hard to ask them for something in an emergency. But if, you had a prescription that was sitting on hand, it's, you use it when you feel like you need it. So I think that's something new that could be useful in our communities. You also mentioned condoms. I think it's great. I think that's one of the oldest ones we have. And at our last webinar, we had our elder talking about condoms and lube and masturbation, and I was like, yeah. So I mean, those are healthy conversations to have, right? And if we're not comfortable talking about masturbation and condoms, how are we supposed to be comfortable with using them? So we really appreciate all the information you shared with us, Sharia. And I encourage everyone to reach out to Katie or Sharia. And they have a lot of information that's free and it's available across the country. Thank you, Sharia. So moving forward, I am going to ask our panelists a few questions if they don't mind. Albert, I will start with you. I was gonna say age before beauty, but I don't like.
You're
No,
gonna get both.
right? I love it. So yeah, if I may ask you a question, Albert.
Sure.
I have a couple here. Please feel free to answer it head on or veer off in whatever way you feel necessary. I think we're all open and willing to hear your great knowledge. So like Sharia had just given us some very Western biomedical HIV prevention strategies. I think it's, as Indigenous people, we all know the importance of our physical, but we know that our spiritual aspect of our well-being is extremely important. And so I was wanting to ask you, if you can share some of your experiences of how important it was in your journey to have connection to community and culture.
Well, when I moved to Vancouver, I met other Indigenous people like myself, and we created a family there, right? A extended family, surrogate family. Even though we're not biologically related, we sort of replaced what we were missing. Vancouver's a big city, very fast paced. And so we restructured our communities and our families, and we actually made clans for each other. So we adopted each other, and we had siblings, and we had mothers and grandmothers. And that is a tradition among Indigenous peoples around the world. When we are outside our home communities, we make one, right? So the one in Vancouver was very much about beginning to strengthen our identities as Indigenous people in the broader community. And we learned a lot from the coastal people, the interior people at BC, who were very welcoming to us. And so we function through the Greater Vancouver Native Cultural Society that is still active to this day.
Amazing. Martin, can I ask you the same question? What has culture and community meant to you in your journey?
I mean, I guess I could talk a little bit about my diagnosis of HIV and the role that community has played in that. And so being a person displaced from culture and community, growing up in a rural and remote community as a Two-Spirit person, it was later on in my life that I was exposed to HIV. And so I've been living with it for about 10 years. And so upon diagnosis, I was very much, the care that I received was very much disease centered. It was very illness centered. I was often just kind of like a clipboard, very rarely addressed by my name or, any sort of personal care or concern or any sort of like cultural safety that I experienced in the Western kind of healthcare system. And so it was really through the community, a lot of the aunties and Two-Spirit folks and other Indigenous people living with HIV, other activists, just kind of these like really radical, powerful Indigenous women living with HIV throughout Turtle Island that were just like out there in their communities, using their voices and their songs and their ceremonies. And a lot of these people, like in the work that I started to get involved with, I had opportunities to travel throughout Turtle Island, and I was exposed, and a lot of this knowledge was being shared with me. It was being role modeled for me. There was people and elders that would pull me aside and offer teachings and knowledge around sexual health or Indigenous activism, or even spiritual principles like humility and respect and compassion. And so it was really, I felt like at that time in my life, I really needed not only Western healthcare to take care of my physical kind of ailment, but I felt like I really needed a lot of spiritual medicine in order to really be nurtured and to grow into the activist that I am today. And so I received a lot of that through the community. And like, it's really interesting. Like, and I remember like as a child, and I don't think I fully understood as a child, but this idea of like knowledge exchange through storytelling is actually like a methodology that was used historically by Indigenous people. This is how we were taught, is through story. And so when I was young and I was listening to these stories, I think I really enjoyed the entertainment value and was offered lessons through those stories. But I think I underestimated the power of them. And it wasn't until later on in my life where I became active in the community, was surrounded by activists, Indigenous leaders, mentors, aunties, cookums, that I started to receive a lot of these stories and was able to fully engage and benefit and appreciate them for, I guess, kind of the spiritual nourishment that they gave me. So like, I really credit a lot of the work that I've done and how far I've come to the stories that were shared to me by these radical activists and these Indigenous leaders in the HIV movement across Turtle Island.
Amazing. I appreciate that. So maybe Martin, if I can ask you, the point of our conversation today is to explore how you're weaving together highly effective preventative strategies with Indigenous knowledge. Can you tell us a bit of how you feel about that, and in what ways you have done this in a good way?
Wow. No, I'm just kidding. I think one thing that's really important to realize is that Indigenous people are the experts of their own communities. And, we live in a Western kind of structure, this colonial structure of hierarchy. And, you have people at the top of governments or the top of nonprofit organizations that experience things like HIV very differently than like an Indigenous community member would. So, I've always been taught to really recognize and to really work and take into consideration the wisdom of community that is already there. I think it's a very Western approach to enter community and say, your problems are A, B, and C, and we're here with our colonial structure and framework and hierarchy to kind of enforce on you our colonial approaches, often creating more harm in the community. And so I think it's a very Indigenous approach to return to our worldviews and ways of knowing and being and identifying the strengths that already exist within our communities. So with that being said, I feel that there are very highly effective tools that have been offered from the Western world things like PrEP, things like the Insta HIV self-test kit, the dry blood spot self-test kit. These are all highly effective tools. But if we think of the history of Indigenous people, you know, and colonization and the broken trust that exists and the reconciliation that's happening or attempting to be happening here in Canada today. And so I think it's really important to think about how do we combine these things? How do we collaborate these Indigenous knowledges and approaches with these highly effective tools? And so we've attempted that here in the province of BC, you know, sought a lot of knowledge and expertise, doing consultations with Indigenous and Two-Spirit community members, establishing Two-Spirit Guidance Committee, you know, seeking knowledge from the community while working with these like highly effective tools. And so is it okay if I share screen for just a second?
Please.
Okay, so just an example of what this could look like is our medicine bundle pilot that we're currently working with in the province of BC. And so what you see here is an Indigenous approach to the HIV self-test kit. So we really acknowledge the power of our own medicines and that spiritual approach and spiritual nourishment that we need to contribute to our sexual health. And so as you can see here as well, we have the Insta HIV self-test kit, the dry blood spot test kits. And so this is an initiative that was created by the community. This was an attempt to make testing accessible to those living in rural and remote communities, to make it accessible to those that were experiencing barriers like financial barriers, travel barriers, things like racism, homophobia, transphobia, you know, people that were just, you know, having issues and challenges and difficulties in accessing Western sexual health resources. And so the approach we took was an Indigenous approach, something that people could identify with, something that was visibly Indigenous, something that would empower them to practice their own culture. And then we also had a support team that was created that we called our trusted messengers that were able to support community members in accessing this sexual health resource. So I think one thing that's really important and that one of these initiatives really attempted was the self-determination, the big contribution and the empowerment and elevation of community, their voices, their strategies, and how they wanted to move forward in creating sexual health resources. It's visibly Indigenous. It's something that I feel can be trusted. And so, yeah, I guess this is just kind of one of the ways of how we kind of collaborate Western sexual health resources with Indigenous worldviews, knowledges, and approaches.
Miigwech. Yeah, you guys are doing some really amazing work. It's definitely an inspiration and a wake-up call for us on this side of the country, I think. And I mean, you spoke to at one point some messaging. I mean, U equals U is not something that our communities know a lot about. And I think it's something we want and need to know more about. But I think this you know, this Western messaging of U equals U is just maybe something that isn't resonating with our communities. And I know you've said that you wanted to do some work and think a little bit more about how we can bring that type of messaging into Indigenous communities. And I look forward to seeing where you go with that. If I may share, I don't know if I was allowed to share that, but I know you
Yes.
had
Yeah,
talked about
well,
it.
yeah, so the medicine bundle pilot is going national. And then in the coming days, weeks, months, I'll be working, you know, with the community and some partners on creating an Indigenous U equals U campaign.
Amazing. We look forward to hearing about that. Yeah. Albert, may I ask you a similar question and get a bit of idea of some of the work that you've been doing where we are weaving together Indigenous knowledges and Western ways of thinking, and what have you done in your work so far?
Well, I think part of the piece around, and if you look at the COVID response with the HIV response, and those are two overlapping or intersecting pandemics, and just how awareness and prevention is kind of on the back burner now, and how public health or society determines, well, we've done our due diligence with awareness and prevention, but that's not true with regard to PrEP in Canada for Indigenous peoples, or PEP. And, the systems, a lot of the interventions are developed in their office around a board table without any real understanding of the dynamics of community. A lot of interventions will be on a cell phone, a survey, when some people don't even have a cell phone, right? And we have to check these assumptions around how we're reaching people who are vulnerable. And we have to get out of our offices. We have to get out from behind our community and do that engagement the way the community wants it, right? In a respectful, safe way. And so I know in Manitoba, our premier said, well, after 2 years of COVID, we've done our due diligence on awareness prevention. If you get it, we'll treat you. And similarly, that happened with HIV. That's why there aren't these campaigns out in the First Nations, Inuit communities around sexual health, HIV, STBBIs, injection drug use, because governments have felt that, they've done their due diligence. Yeah, we know that in First Nations communities, some people still do not know the difference between HIV and AIDS. So it requires us to continue that education because it's a different generation, right? And so just the lack of sexual health around gay, bisexual, trans female, trans males and trans females is not even out there. People are not even doing it. So for myself here, we've set up our own community center. It's called the Youth Huddle. It's called Go Ask CATIE, and it has all those additional things that we need, elders, the medicines, a safe space. We have the clinical testing component, and it's in the neighborhood where they want to come to, where they're comfortable in coming to, not downtown, not in a community health center or a clinic. So we're piloting that, right, in Winnipeg right now. We also have the Sisters of Fire, which is a group of HIV positive Indigenous women who are leaders, right? HIV positive people are the leaders, and it goes back to the very beginning of the Canadian response to HIV, was people living with HIV are the experts, and they identify those gaps and barriers and have to challenge the system to do better. Right? Like Saskatchewan has right now the highest rate of HIV transmission in Canada. Manitoba is the second, right? Why is that? When we talk about PEP and PrEP and all of these, this new technologies, including antiretrovirals, they're just not, accessible. There are inherent rights. There are civil rights to access those. And they also are constitutional rights. Right. And that's why we have to get these systems to be effective, right? That, with the inquiry on murder of missing Indigenous women, they said, there's genocide in Canada, right? Is incremental genocide, structural genocide, and HIV and is one of those tools, right, for genocide. is that, Dr. Barry LaValle says that, that illness, infectious diseases is one of those aspects of genocide and anti-Indigenous racism. So we have to call it out and address these gaps and say, it's the 21st century. Why are we still, having to go back to 101 approaches when people should be accessing PrEP? And one of the things I say here with, like diagnosed people, just a second, I'm in an airport lounge. That was good up until then. So she's telling us. So again, that's an intervention right there, right? About wearing a mask, still in airports, right? So those are examples. But, and I said, for people testing positive in Manitoba, why don't we ask them if they heard of PrEP? Then we would know, right? If they were even informed, there was an intervention for them, and they have HIV. So we need to ask those questions and do that type of research. The other type of research we need to do is knowledge, attitudes, and behaviors, as Megan talked about, condom use, people's knowledge levels and their behaviors. Otherwise, we're just guessing, right? So we need, and that was done years ago, but it hasn't been done lately. So.
Amazing. He's about doing some really amazing work. Albert, I'm curious if you could have anything from government, whether it be provincial or federal, what would you ask for them? World's your oyster.
Well, sec. Well, I would ask them how, with the pandemic response for COVID, where did HIV and STBBI sit in that pandemic response? Because when people were giving out hampers, that was food and cleaning supplies and masks, where was the new syringe, right? Where was the condom? Because people were isolating, and of course they're going to have sex. So there wasn't that intersection with COVID and HIV or STBBIs during that last 2.5 years. So we're seeing the increasing rates of HIV in Canada now because of that. So even at that level with the federal government, where is the Indigenous leadership on HIV and STBBIs from community, not from government, but from community? The National Aboriginal Council on HIV and AIDS was disbanded like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and there's been nothing since. So to me, the question is, okay, where did HIV and the STBBIs sit in the COVID-19 pandemic plan for Canada? And that'll let us know how much investment went to getting the prevention and the testing information out there during the last 2.5 years. So we need leadership at the federal, provincial, territorial government level, health department level, from the community, from the Indigenous community who are on the ground and have been doing this for decades.
Absolutely. We're getting close to the end, and I just really wanted to ask a couple more questions. I guess I wanted to turn it to treatment as prevention, and ask, is this concept of treatment as prevention or undetectable equals untransmittable, how has it been taken up by our communities, and what does it mean to people living with HIV? Martin, can I ask you that question?
Sure. In one of the earlier introductory slides, when it was introducing treatment as prevention, or U equals U, it said, HIV positive people have a role to play. And I just want to be really careful with that kind of wording, because we really got to think about, where does the responsibility lay when it comes to HIV status. I mean, me as an Indigenous person living with an undetectable viral load, is somebody else's HIV status my responsibility? Or like, I just want to make sure that we all play a role in this as healthcare providers, as activists, as, you know, panelists, spreading this knowledge and this education and this information on what these kind of concepts mean, and, you know, these preventative strategies. But I think also as individuals, it's really important to understand there's actually a hashtag that's been going around and that I've been hearing of in just smaller discussions at some gatherings and conversations that I've had with, you know, some friends and fellow activists around HIV equal. And that hashtag pretty much just means that everybody is responsible for their own HIV status. And so through my personal experience, engaging with people physically and having them disclose, you know, I'm HIV negative, I'm accessing PrEP, I'm really impressed. I'm really, really impressed. I feel like often undetectable could be kind of misunderstood. People hear HIV, it scares them. And it seems like a lot of kind of earlier days that I was navigating and, you know, cruising and like engaging sexually with other people, it seems to really run on an honor system of, you know, like, oh, I was tested a few weeks ago, or, you know, I tested negative last week, or, you know, kind of, are you clean? Are you STI free, HIV neg? And people will believe this. People will, you know, take this information and, you know, engage in these sexual activities based on an honor system. And this is a real opportunity for HIV transmission. And so when we think about things like PrEP and, you know, being undetectable and ARVs and condoms and all these strategies, what role do we play in that? And, you know, what are we responsible for? So I don't want to place all of that responsibility on the people that have or need to access ARVs, but also on people that should be accessing PrEP or maybe seeking that knowledge from more reliable sources and then healthcare providers. So I actually encourage people to play an active role in their sexual health that is not based on an honor system. So that being said, I think U equals U, highly effective. It's worked well in my life. I think, you know, this kind of promotion and campaign has been highly effective, but I feel like its focus has generally been on like urban city centers, kind of Western settlers. There's not a lot of focus being put on Indigenous people. And so I'll give you an example. Like if I was in downtown Toronto on Church Street, or if I was like cruising St. Catharines in Montreal, and, you know, I had met someone and we, you know, were kind of negotiating like how we were going to engage with each other. If I use the word undetectable, 9 times out of 10, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And usually the response I'd get is either they're undetectable too, or they're accessing PrEP, or they know what that means. And so I'm able to use that kind of jargon and language in urban city centers, in Western kind of environments, or, you know, but when going to Indigenous communities, like if I went up to the Yukon Territory in the community that I'm from, or maybe even Northern BC or one of the Northern kind of provinces, and I was kind of, you know, having a conversation of how I was going to engage with someone, if I used a word like undetectable, I mean, I'm not sure that they would fully understand the weight of that and what that means. I know that if I were to include, like, I have an undetectable viral load, an HIV viral load that is undetectable, how the weight of that might impact the person and cause fear of, you know, exposure or transmission to these kinds of things. So we really want to come up with a strategy around community engagement and allowing them to really use the language and the visibility to reach these communities. And so often you see us in the news, you see Indigenous people in the news, you see how we're disproportionately affected. You know, these researchers and scientists and settlers get to decide what language is being used when they're referring to how we're impacted by things like HIV. And often the words that they use create harm. And I learned this from one of my aunties about how these words can cause harm and how we see ourselves as Indigenous people. And so what I would love to see is these testimonials, these stories, these pictures of Indigenous people in a campaign that aren't saying, get on PrEP, get on ARVs, but actually modeling the way and saying, I take PrEP because this is how it benefits my life. This is how it keeps me safe. And they have a testimonial of how that works in their life. You know, you can have an undetectable Two-Spirit or Indigenous person talking about the benefit of ARVs and how that has improved the quality of their life, and really modeling that way through sharing story. And so it's really these kinds of downfalls that the media focuses on that really perpetuates racism, stigma, discrimination. And so I just want to, sorry, I keep sharing materials with you, but I just want to show you an example of what community-led promotional materials could look like. These Two-Spirit people here are all authentically, accurately portrayed Two-Spirit people, very empowering images. And these messages here were created by a group of Two-Spirit people that say Two-Spirit people exist in the realm outside of the binary. We are weaving together medicines to protect our nations. Our sex is sacred. You can now order your medicine bundle that includes an HIV and STI self-test kit at cbrc.net/medicine bundle. So this is what Indigenous medicine, or sorry, messaging looks like. And, you know, it's empowering, it's Indigenous led, we're visible, it's in language that we understand. So I would really love to see this U equals U translate to Indigenous communities, saying, yes, these are Western medicines, but these are the medicines that we use as well. And this is our culture, and we're visible, and we're here, and we're accessing these medicines. And this is how it is improving the quality of our lives. So, I mean, I think Indigenous-led initiatives through story, through, you know, culture, ceremony, and the way we engage and build relationships with one another is something I would really love to translate into a U equals U Indigenous-led campaign.
Miigwech for sharing those, and Miigwech for leading this type of work. I mean, it's, you know, I think we're all going to be following very closely. And for anyone who's listening, I'm sure we could find you. Would you like to share your contact information or your socials, or?
I could probably share my work email in the chat.
Sure, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I'm sure people would love to contact you.
Yeah, I could do I just put it in the chat here? I'm not sure. I'll just share it with the host, and they could feel free to share it.
Wonderful. Albert, we're coming to a closing, and I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to share. I know you had some things you also wanted to share. I have one more question for each of you.
Yeah, I think with regard to treatment as prevention, with the medical system and the researchers that created these antiretrovirals, or even PrEP, it's a reciprocal relationship with the Indigenous community, right? Because ideally prevention is prevention, right? Treatment is the second level. And as I said earlier, our civil and constitutional rights is to have access to that prevention information and tools, whatever they are, in a first world experience, right? Not having to find it in other areas, like in a health clinic in a city. That information should be in our communities, whether we're northern, rural, or remote, right? And secondly, treatment as prevention is about not just taking the antiretroviral drugs, it's the life around that, the community, the family, the culture. I've talked to people who've been on antiretrovirals for over 20 years, but they don't have a social life, right? So what is the trade-off in treatment as prevention, right? Where is that community of support around people who are on ARVs? And that's what the medical health system needs to know, as well as the scientists. There.
I appreciate that. We did have a question in the chat. As a harm reduction worker, what would you like to see more of for Indigenous people, especially youth in organizations? Martin, would you like to answer this one? What would you like to see more of in Indigenous organizations or in organizations for Indigenous youth?
I
They're
mean,
kind of young still.
I think like resisting the hierarchy, like it's quite often that these young people know exactly what it is that they need. They just need support in accessing that, whether that's funding or establishing, youth committees or doing, one-on-one consultations. I think often what's really kind of not brought to the table is the voices and the wisdom of community. And so that's kind of a lot of what we are working on in our own initiatives at the Two Spirit program at CBRC, is really just capturing the wisdom of community and allowing them to drive and guide the initiatives that we work on through ongoing consultations with them, and just kind of building and strengthening our relationships with our community members, and maintaining those relationships. So I think working from the bottom up, even though it feels a bit strange saying bottoms up.
Heads up.
Heads up.
Great. I have one last question to wrap us up. Maybe I'd also like to ask Megan as well. Maybe I can start with you, Megan. But we are here today to talk to people who are working with and for Indigenous communities. So frontline workers, service providers. So I'm wanting to know what's one thing that the audience can do to support communities around supporting people living with HIV and HIV prevention. So maybe I'll ask you, Megan.
Thanks, Aaron. I think Martin and Albert have talked about a number of things that frontline workers can do. When we were first thinking about this webinar series, that is the audience that we were really hoping would be attending the webinars, are people working in Indigenous communities, whether that's on reserve, in health centers, or in urban areas as outreach workers. And I think one of my colleagues' voices is really resonating with me too. Renee Boucher talks a lot about what causes a lot of harm in community today, and that continues to be stigma. And so how can we, as Martin talked about, how can we all take personal responsibility in doing our own work to educate ourselves and be able to engage in conversations and to reduce stigma and break down stigma, so that people in community aren't continue to be faced with misinformation or misunderstandings if they're disclosing their status, or if they're trying to access healthcare and healthcare hasn't done additional work to educate themselves on how to prescribe PrEP or PEP, or be able to provide HIV treatment. So I think there's a lot of work that we can do and a lot of advocacy that we can do to make this a priority in community. I think it was Albert who talked about calling on Indigenous leadership to really look at where their voices are in terms of bringing this forward, and how we can continue to have conversations and work together to address this. And also, in listening to Albert and Martin today, I heard them really talk about the need for relationship. So how can frontline workers do their work in building relationship with community and really center that community voice? I think about JIPA and MIPA, so greater involvement of people living with HIV and meaningful engagement of people living with HIV. And so how do we really ensure that those voices who know what we need to do and have ideas, and our efforts can be community led. Like Martin said, we don't have to be sitting in an office coming up with the solutions, but rather how are we out there building relationship, having the courage to have conversation in community, and the willingness and commitment to continue to learn and grow. We're not always going to get things right, but how do we continue to learn and grow and revisit and take responsibility, when we make mistakes, and learn to do better? I think those are some things that I'm hoping that we can do here at Oahas, and would really like to call on my colleagues across the province to do as well.
Great, Megan. Martin, can I ask you for your final thoughts on, for the people that are paying attention and, would like to, what would you like them to take away from today's conversation?
I mean, I think what I would, and what I've been working on for the past few years, is really elevating the voices of community and the people with lived and living experiences. And inclusion doesn't start after the outline has been created. Inclusion, meaningful engagement, and greater involvement starts at the moment of inception, initiation, whatever, at the very beginning, all the way to evaluation. And then you maintain those relationships. So I think that's what I'm hoping people would take away from today, is that when you're trying to create services or resources for the community, where are they? Are they involved from inception to the evaluation? Or are they being tokenized, coming in, at implementation? So I think I really encourage people to put some focus on the wisdom in community with their lived and living experiences. And I mean, yeah, I guess that's what I hope people take from today, is the expertise in community.
Albert, can I ask you what you hope our audience takes away to support communities?
Yeah, the first North American response to the HIV pandemic began in 1988 with the inaugural International Two-Spirit Gathering. And after that first gathering, we decided to meet on the land. And so this year, the 35th gathering was held in Montana, and the 36th will be in Canada next year in the Atlantic. So get out from your office, get out from the city, get into the land, get in the bush, do some camping, create that community, that village, that family, and let IPHAs lead, right? Indigenous people living with HIV/AIDS, elders, let them lead and show you what the solutions are in the land. Those medicines are there, those teachings are there, and that creation of family and relationship with the natural world is our journey together, right? So get out from your office and start looking around for some place to camp.
Miigwech. I would personally like to thank you, Miigwech, to all of the participants today. Your knowledge, your leadership, your forward thinking and your love for community is really apparent. And anyone who hasn't had the pleasure to meet you, well, I hope they get to this year sometime. And I hope that we can share your information, your contact information after this. I will reach out to you personally to see if that's allowed, because I'm sure we have participants who would like to continue these conversations and maybe work together or shoot you some funding or something, right? But yeah, just to me, Gwedge, for everyone for participating. I look forward to seeing you all at our third webinar during Aboriginal AIDS Awareness Week in the first week of December. And we will be discussing pathways to accessing all these highly effective HIV preventative strategies. We're going to have some other really special guests with us. Yeah, and if I can ask Linda to close us off in a good way, and I hope that everyone has really taken what their heart needs from this conversation and bring that back to your communities and support your communities in a really good way. Miigwech to Martin and Albert today for joining us.
Miigwech, I was just one of the sayings that I like to say here is that I know all. I know everything. I'm a walking Google. But teach me and talk to me about everything that you know, and I will know a lot more. So Miigwech, for sharing everything that you said. I felt every word that everybody said, and I say Miigwech to that. Like I said earlier, is that we don't walk behind anybody. We walk alongside. We don't walk in front. We walk alongside because we know what each other are into. We know what each other have within us, our hearts. And all I feel right now is love amongst everybody that's here and that's sharing, and people that are going to be watching, because we don't know much as beings. We're not born with the education, with the knowledge of everything, but as we slowly get older and are walking along journey alongside everybody, that just keeps connecting, and our knowledge and our sharing is going to get that stigma out of here. It's going to get racism out of there. It's going to be replaced by love, and we are the people that can do that. Because like I said earlier, we just keep adding on more and more, because it's not a death sentence no more. It's a life sentence with love and healing and everything that we as human beings want to share. So let your love, let your blood flow so that your love can grow. I say Miigwech, Creator. Like I've always said, Miigwech, for our loves, our past loves, for the loves we have now, and for the loves we have in the future, whether it be just 2 seconds from now. Miigwech, Creator, for the air, for the wind, for the sun, for we all see it and feel it at the same time. Miigwech, for us being all one. Miigwech, Creator. Miigwech. Miigwech. And I love you all.